Thanks for coming along with me and watching our little preview video of an event that we're hosting this Saturday, March 23rd, at the Taylor Library building, right next to the store. We're happy to have our friends Robert Lisak and David Ottenstein, who are the creators of a new hardcover book called Capital America, a photographic portrait of the 50 state capitals. And quite an effort went into this. And gentlemen, thanks for a few minutes this afternoon, and we look forward to seeing you on Saturday. David, Rob, good to see you.
Great to be here.
Listen,
thanks to you and to Milford Photo for hosting.
Well, thank you very much. You got that Milford Photo in there quick and early. Appreciate that, Rob. Hey, so Rob, let me start with you because we've talked about this already. So, and give me an idea of maybe the concept behind this. It seems like a really big project. Where did the genius of it come?
Yeah, it was almost a 10 full year project, but in the end, by the time we had the actual book in our hands, but it started back in 2013 when David's been engaged in a long-term project photographing out in the Midwest and the upper mountain states. And, we've been friends and colleagues for a long time here in New Haven. And he came back from one of his trips, called me up, said, do you want to come see some work prints from my last trip? And I'm like, yeah, sure. So I went over there and he had stopped. He showed some pictures and I was like, where is this? And he said that because he had been photographing mostly farms and small towns. And there was this beautiful picture from the Ohio State House. And he said, yeah, I stopped in Columbus and, I shot some pictures in the State House. And I was immediately struck by the pictures. And then I went home and it struck a chord with me because when I was first studying photography, there was a book called Courthouse, which was a photographic survey of American courthouses from small counties to big cities, done by a number of really wonderful photographers. And that book had a big influence on me. And I just thought, why don't we do the state capitals? It seemed like a crazy idea, but I called David and we got together and talked about the possibility of trying to do this together in the sense that we could divide up the country more or less and get to all 50 in some kind of reasonable time and expense. And that's how it started. So, and maybe David wants to talk about our first trip together to see if we were on the same page, which was the beginning of the collaboration.
Please, David. Yeah, go ahead. And I'm always curious. I just spent a few days with my family down in DC, walking around. Obviously, plenty of entablatures and facades and big buildings. The access must have been something. So there were challenges. And if you would speak to any of those challenges that you might have encountered, it took I'm sure a tremendous amount of planning.
It did. It often did. The access early in the trip was often easier than it became by later in the trip, as in more security installed in some capitals. But it also varied quite a bit. Some capitals just walk in. I believe it was in Vermont. I had called ahead. And when we got there, we thought we should check in with someone. We couldn't find anyone to check in with. It was so laid back, so easy. And it was basically the idea, yeah, this is public space. You can wander around and take pictures. Generally, and more so by 10 years later, we were finding that there was essentially, I'll call it airport security to go through. And some capitals just varied. There were some places that one or two that wanted to assign or that did assign someone to be with us the whole time we were there. But that was really the exception. More often it was just as long as we're staying in public spaces as opposed to wandering into offices or back hallways, we were free to roam around and take pictures. And that roaming process of just thinking, observing, and photographing, I think was an important part for both of us about how we worked in photographing these spaces.
You know, you bring up that idea that you need to take time to develop an eye to the place, and I'll often tell people that timing in photography, it's not just about shooting a sport or an action sequence, but being in the right place at the right time in terms of light is a huge importance to interior photography. Yeah.
Yeah, that's absolutely true. I think that the exteriors require real attention to time of day and the quality of the light and weather and so on. The interiors give you a little more leeway, but the difference between a really grim rainy day versus a sunny day can be profound, even on some of these interiors, just because of there are a lot of skylights, there's a lot of window light and so on. So it really does affect the way things look. That picture that's going by now in Alaska would not be the same without that late sunlight hitting, afternoon sunlight coming through.
Yeah.
And creating that pattern on the side of the wall.
Right. Gives it that depth that only that sunlight can give you there in that regard.
Yeah.
Fellas, I was online reading about your book and some of the reviews and things, and it made me think about what the purpose behind this. First and foremost, it's, I suppose you could say, architectural study, but it's more than that, of course. It's a study of our relationship with our civic powers that be, I guess, and what as you look at it now, how would you define the work?
Well, it's an interesting question, and it's interesting to try to go back before we had done the project and kind of think what was important to us then and what did we discover along the way. I think a big part of it, Rob and I both have a background in architectural photography. We've both been very interested in photographing buildings, particularly interiors of buildings. And I think for me, I saw this as an opportunity to really pursue that kind of photography, architectural, but looking, not trying to do an architectural description of the building or a survey of all the architectural styles, which we often see with in connection with grand public buildings like this. But it was a setting for us to challenge each other and to try to come up with some really strong, interesting photographs. As the project went on and as we started making more and more observations of these places that we were seeing, it became clear that it was about civic engagement and the idea of these are special buildings. They're not like most other buildings. And then we started asking questions like, well, why is that? What does it mean? One of the things that I saw is that the state capitol buildings became stages for the practice of democracy. Protests happen inside or in front of buildings. And we saw some of that in the time that we were visiting and photographing.
Yeah, to that point, I think that, a lot of us, last time we went to our state capitol was like in a fifth grade, school trip or something. And it was a real revelation to, I think, both David and me, how much these buildings represent the shifts in the society within the particular state in terms of participants, who's commemorated, who isn't commemorated, how that evolved over time. The history is palpable in the buildings. Like if we pause here for a second on these two photographs, the left-hand picture is in Little Rock, Arkansas, and this monument is to the 9 children who desegregated the schools in 1952 in Little Rock. And it was a pivotal moment in American history. And this is on the side of the building. And I think it's interesting to me how they're moving toward the Capitol, toward the public domain. They're representing, yeah, we want to be included. And this monument obviously is much newer than the monuments in front of the building commemorating the Confederate war dead from the Civil War. So you have both things on the grounds, and it's interesting. The picture on the right, this is here in Connecticut, and I photographed it primarily because of the beauty of the column, the color behind it, the flag. There's kind of a nice symmetry. Abraham Lincoln right in the center. So I did it mainly as a photographic kind of response to the beauty of the particular moment. And then when I was making a large print, I read the plaque below, and the plaque was donated by a survivor of the Holocaust who found a new life in Connecticut after World War II and wanted to express his gratitude for being able to live here after what he had gone through. So those kinds of things just come up over and over again throughout the buildings, and it's tied to the particular context of the particular state and so on. I found that really interesting. So I think David and I really, and correct me if I'm wrong, David, we really want to make beautiful photographs. That's like our first impulse. We didn't particularly want to make a catalog of like, oh, you can see this, you can see that, but how the historical and cultural meanings of various aspects of the building show up over and over again became a big part of what we were trying to express, I think.
Yeah, no, I think that is quite true. I don't know if we can get to it, but the pair of photographs of Minnesota and Utah, it shows the same sort of idea. One of the things that really struck me is in just below the frieze, above the painting of Lincoln, it says the trail of the pioneer bore the footprints of liberty. And I don't know if it's possible to zoom in on that picture, but you see the pioneer and their wagons depicted on the right side, and on the left, the Native Americans. And it really struck me, when this building was built and we said that the trail of the pioneer bore the footprints of liberty, I just have to really question whose liberty. It raises all sorts of interesting questions about who's represented and whose voice speaks within these buildings. And then the picture on the right, this is clearly added. This is on a stair landing going up to the second floor, and here's a statue that is of a woman, which we don't see that often, certainly in the original structures of these buildings. And yet here, at some point later, I think this was added. Well, she died in 1973, so it was certainly sometime after that we again expand the representation of who's in these buildings. And you really can't help but see this and think about this when you're spending the amount of time that we did across all these different state capitol buildings.
And I thank you for your time with us, and I very much look forward to seeing the book in person. You mentioned the detail in that, and I would think someone coming to this book would want to linger over it and study it for all of those details that your rich photographs have captured. guys. Thank you very much. And again, we're hosting Rob and David this Saturday, March 23rd at the Taylor Library Building next to Milford Photo, 1 o'clock, I believe it is, guys.
Yeah.
And they'll be there to talk about their images, their project. They'll be selling books, signing books. And so we look forward to a really big crew there this coming Saturday. Gentlemen, thanks again. Look forward to seeing you in a couple of days.
Great.
Thank
Thank
you,
you,
Jesse.
Jesse.
All right. Cheers.
Really
Very good
appreciate
work. Thank you very much. And we'll see you soon. Take care now.
Thanks.